On a cold May night in 2017, Glasgow stopped feeling like a city and started looking like a war zone. A dark blue Skoda Octavia ripped through the north side, engine screaming, tires clawing at wet tarmac. Behind it, not one but two cars bore down, pushing past 100 miles per hour as they tore through streets that most people only knew in daylight. In the driver's seat was a man who understood danger better than most. Stephen Bonzo Daniel. On that night, he wasn't a crime figure, a father, or a businessman. He was prey, running out of road. Cornered on a slip road off the M8 motorway near Port Dundas, the chase ended with a sickening crunch of metal. What happened next was so brutal, so methodical, that first responders thought they were looking at the aftermath of a shooting. Stephen's face was hacked open with such ferocity that police believed he'd been blasted at point-blank range. This wasn't a brawl gone wrong. It wasn't a drunken dispute or a heat-of-the-moment attack. It was a message. Because this wasn't just about Stephen. This was about bloodlines, power, and a feud that had already turned Glasgow into a battlefield. This was a calculated attempt to wipe out a key figure in one of Scotland's most notorious crime clans. The man in that car wasn't some obscure name in a report. He was Stephen Bonzo Daniel, a central player in a gangland conflict that had raged for over 2 decades and left behind a trail of blood, betrayal, and bodies. How does a former taxi boss and devoted father end up strapped into a car that's being hunted through city streets? How does a man raised in Glasgow's schemes become the target of an ambush so vicious it shocked even hardened detectives? And what kind of hatred drives his enemies to plan not just his death, but his obliteration? You're watching Crime Pulse, where we dive deep into the darkest corners of the underworld and unpack the stories most people only whisper about. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It takes a second for you, but it changes everything for us. It helps us battle the algorithm, grow the channel, and bring you more real stories of crime, chaos, and survival straight from the streets. And you'll be the first to know whenever we drop a new video. Tonight, we're not just telling a crime story, we're unpacking a saga. From high-speed pursuits and ultra-sophisticated trackers to machetes, encrypted phones, and Dubai-based gangsters, this is the chilling tale of Stephen Bonzo Daniel and the Glasgow gangland wars. We'll go back to where it all started, the streets he grew up on, the family he came from, and the enemies that shaped his fate. Because to understand why someone wanted him erased, you first have to understand who he was and who he belonged to. To understand why men were willing to chase Stephen Bonzo Daniel through Glasgow at 100 miles an hour, you have to go back long before that May night, long before the Skoda, the motorway, and the blood. You have to go back to where he was born and, more importantly, who he was born as. Stephen grew up in Glasgow's north side, in hard-edged neighbourhoods like Postle Park and Milton. These weren't just rough postcodes, they were pressure cookers. Streets where kids learned early that loyalty mattered, that money didn't come clean, and that some surnames carried more weight than any job title. Stephen didn't just inherit a childhood, he inherited a criminal dynasty. Because he wasn't just Stephen, he was a Daniel. One of those Daniels. At the top of that bloodline sat his uncle, Jamie Daniel. For decades, Jamie ruled the Glasgow underworld like a Scottish answer to a mob boss out of a crime thriller. Only there was nothing fictional about him. From the 1,980 seconds until his death from cancer in 2016, Jamie built an empire stitched together with heroin, cocaine, intimidation, and an iron rule of silence. Police quietly linked his world to dozens of unsolved murders and hundreds of violent incidents. In Glasgow's criminal folklore, the Daniel crime clan wasn't just feared, it was legendary and lethal. Crime in the family wasn't limited to the men. Stephen's mother, Annette Daniel, wasn't some oblivious bystander living on the edge of a secret life. She was deep in the game. She ran a professional shoplifting crew that targeted high-end retailers across Scotland and northern England. This wasn't petty theft. Thousands of pounds worth of designer clothes, jewellery, and electronics flowed through her hands. She wasn't just stealing. She was coordinating routes, people, and product. She was running logistics. In the Daniel world, crime wasn't a rebellion. It was a family business model. By the time Stephen hit his 20s, he wasn't a hanger-on or a kid trying to impress older guys. He was embedded, part of the second generation of Glasgow's most dangerous organized crime outfit. Short, stocky, quiet. He didn't look like the stereotype of a crime boss. No flashy suits, no loud bravado. But behind the unassuming exterior was a man described as calculating, well-connected, and quietly dangerous. The sort of person who didn't need to shout to be heard. On paper, Stephen was a businessman. He helped run Keys, a private hire taxi firm in Glasgow. To most people, it was just another taxi company. To police, it was suspected of being something more: a moving network, shuttling drugs and dirty money around the city under the cover of everyday fares. Another Daniel-linked front, a payday loan office in Postle Park, looked legit from the outside. Bulletproof glass, desks, paperwork. But behind that facade, investigators believed it was laundering tens of thousands of pounds in criminal cash. When Police Scotland and HMRC hit it in a 2015 multi-agency raid, the doors closed, but the charges never stuck to Stephen. Once again, Bonzo stayed one step ahead. Yet even with his low profile, there was one thing Stephen could never hide: his name. He was Jamie Daniels' nephew. In Glasgow's underworld, that was both armor and target, because the Daniels didn't rule unchallenged. They were locked in a blood feud with another dangerous outfit, the Lyons crime family from Cumbernauld in North Lanarkshire. What began as business tensions in the early 2000s, disputes over cocaine profits and protection rackets, curdled into something darker. This wasn't just about turf anymore. It became a criminal civil war. The turning point came in 2010 with the murder of Kevin Gerbil Carroll, one of the Daniels' most feared enforcers and the husband of Jamie's daughter. Carroll was ambushed as he sat in his Audi outside an Asda supermarket in Rob Royston. In broad daylight, in front of horrified shoppers, masked gunmen in body armor executed him with clinical precision, firing multiple shots into his head and body. Police strongly suspected the Lyons. And in Glasgow's underworld, a hit like that isn't just revenge. It's a declaration. From that moment, the feud wasn't simmering anymore. It was boiling. When Jamie Daniel died from cancer in 2016, the impact wasn't just felt around a hospital bed or at a funeral. It rippled through Glasgow's underworld. For years, Jamie had been the gravitational center of the Daniel crime clan. With him gone, there was a power vacuum, and vacuums don't last long in organized crime. Stephen Bonzo, Daniel didn't hold a press conference or crown himself king. That wasn't his style. He didn't flaunt his position, but quietly, steadily, he stepped into a new level of influence. Meetings shifted his way. People who once reported to Jamie now checked in with him. He was careful, methodical, and he knew the stakes. And somewhere, watching from the shadows, the Lyons took note. By 2017, Bonzo wasn't just a name on a police intelligence chart. He was a problem for their business and a symbol of the Daniel legacy they wanted to erase. They didn't just want to hurt him, they wanted to send a message powerful enough to echo across the city. May 17th, 2017 started like a good night for Stephen. Now 39, he was at Ibrox Stadium, the fortress of Rangers Football Club, watching a match against Aberdeen from the comfort of a hospitality box. Beside him was Stephen Malcolm, a Glasgow taxi boss and close associate. Inside that box, the atmosphere was easy banter, drinks and football. For a few hours, the noise of the terraces drowned out the noise of the streets. But outside those walls, the game was different. As the final whistle blew and fans streamed out, someone else was watching the exits, waiting, clocking movements. When Stephen left Ibrox and got behind the wheel of his dark blue Skoda Octavia, he had no idea a trap months in the making was about to snap shut. He drove through the city's north side, familiar roads in areas he knew better than most. But somewhere around Milton, a neighborhood already scarred by gang violence, two cars slipped in behind him, a silver Volkswagen Golf and a black Audi S3. These weren't random drivers, they were hunters. Bonzo was no stranger to danger. In his world, paranoia isn't a flaw, it's survival. He sensed something was wrong. The cars stayed too close, too long. The Golf edged nearer, the Audi shadowed behind. Stephen stamped on the accelerator. The Skoda surged forward, and the chase ignited. They tore through Postle Park, a Daniel stronghold, engines howling, streetlights streaking past. Stephen pushed the car hard, hitting speeds around 100 miles per hour, trying every trick he knew to shake them. At one point, he even considered the unthinkable, driving down the wrong side of the motorway to get away. But the cars behind him didn't flinch. No panic, no hesitation, because they already knew where he was going. What Stephen didn't realize was that the game had been rigged before it began. His car had been fitted with a sophisticated tracking device sourced from a shadowy Manchester-based firm. This wasn't some cheap gadget off the internet. It was cutting-edge tech, the first of its kind seen in Scotland, giving his enemies a live map of his every move. They weren't reacting to him, they were guiding him into position. As his Skoda reached the off-ramp at Port Dundas, near junction 16 of the M8, the trap finally snapped. The VW Golf slammed into his car with brutal force, ramming it off course and into a pole. Metal screamed, glass exploded. The world went black. Dazed, slumped over the wheel, Stephen was no longer a driver. He was a target. The black Audi S3 pulled up. 3 men spilled out, armed with a machete, a cleaver, and a hammer. What followed was pure horror. They swarmed the trapped Skoda, smashing the windows, hacking into his face and head with such savage intensity that his nose was almost severed. His tongue was shredded, teeth and jawbone were left exposed. Blood pooled in the driver's seat. When first responders arrived, they were convinced he'd been shot at close range. Only later did they realize all of it, the carnage. The damage had been done with blades and blunt force. And yet, somehow, Stephen Daniel didn't die. By sheer, twisted luck, the attack happened just minutes from Glasgow Royal Infirmary, and one of the country's top surgeons was on duty that night. Rushed from the wreckage, hovering between life and death, he was pulled back from the edge. Reports would later claim he'd lost an eye, something his family disputed. But one thing was certain. His face was so badly disfigured he was barely recognizable. Physically and psychologically, he would carry that night with him forever. The men who left him for dead thought they'd finished the job. What they'd really done was ignite the next phase of a war. As ambulances raced Stephen Bonzo Daniel to Glasgow Royal Infirmary, the men who had tried to butcher him were already erasing their tracks. Within minutes of the attack, flames lit up the night. The silver Volkswagen Golf and the black Audi S3 used in the ambush were found dumped and torched nearby, reduced to twisted skeletons of metal. It was a classic gangland move: burn the evidence, burn the trail. But this time, the violence was so extreme and the pattern so precise that Police Scotland knew they weren't looking at a one-off act of revenge. At first, all they had was chaos: a mangled car, a barely alive victim, and 2 burnt-out vehicles. But as detectives started pulling at threads, something darker began to emerge. In the digital ashes, they uncovered WhatsApp messages sent just hours after the attack. There was no remorse, no hesitation, only gloating. One message read, "You happy the day then, mate?" The reply came back dripping with satisfaction. "Love it, mate. Heard he can't see," followed by a laughing emoji. In another image, the cleaver used in the attack was casually photographed lying on the Audi's back seat before the car was set alight. This wasn't just brutality. It was pride. The Lions wanted the message to travel. They strike deep, and they strike without mercy. But detectives soon realized that the assault on Stephen wasn't the start of something. It was the crescendo of a 6-month wave of violence that had already turned parts of Glasgow into a battlefield. As investigative teams dug into recent assaults, they kept finding the same signature. In December 2016, Robert Daniel, Stephen's cousin, was chased into a house in Robroyston and struck with a hatchet. In January 2017, 1-year-old Thomas Billsland suffered a fractured skull in Cranhill after attackers armed with a machete set upon him. 2 months later, in March, 2-year-old Gary Petty was ambushed outside an Italian restaurant in Maryhill. Carrying a takeaway bag one moment, he was fending off a machete the next, dropping his food as he desperately tried to shield his head. The violence didn't stop there. In April 2017, Ryan Fitzsimmons, a 3-4-year-old supermarket worker and brother of a Daniel associate, was attacked with a sword in Clydebank. The blows left him brain damaged. When his mother saw the extent of his injuries, she suffered a heart attack. The damage wasn't just physical, It tore through families, leaving trauma in its wake. When police examined these cases together, one chilling detail tied them all into a single campaign. Every victim's vehicle had been bugged. Each car was tagged with the same model of ultra-sophisticated tracking device, purchased through a shell supplier based in Manchester. Small, magnetized, capable of transmitting real-time location data, these devices turned every journey into a map for would-be assassins. Investigators admitted later they had never seen this level of tactical planning in a domestic gang feud. It looked less like street crime and more like covert operations. The evidence pointed in one direction, a systematic hunt orchestrated by the Lions crime group, now operating in a hybrid world partly from Glasgow, partly from Spain, and always shielded behind burner phones and stolen high-powered vehicles. The timeline of attacks aligned with one explosive flashpoint. On 16 January 2017, known Lions associate Ross Monaghan was shot in the back outside St George's Primary School in Pennelly. The bullet hit his shoulder blade and exited cleanly, missing vital organs. He survived, but the symbolism was impossible to ignore. A shooting outside a primary school, broad daylight, no fear of fallout. Authorities believed it was a Daniel retaliation. Monaghan had previously stood trial for the 2010 murder of Kevin Gerbil Carroll, the Daniel enforcer whose execution outside Asda had supercharged the feud. Monaghan walked free after being acquitted. To the Lions, he was a survivor. To the Daniels, he was a scar that never healed. The shooting of Monaghan stripped away whatever fragile restraint remained. The gloves were off. From that moment, Glasgow's underworld plunged into full-scale tit-for-tat carnage. And in the middle of it all stood Stephen Bonzo Daniel, alive, barely, but now the central figure in a feud that was beginning to look less like rivalry and more like open war. By the time Stephen Bonzo Daniel was stitched back together in hospital, Police Scotland knew they were dealing with more than a rogue hit squad. This wasn't random chaos, it was a campaign. A calculated, high-tech offensive aimed squarely at the Daniel clan. And if they didn't stop it, more bodies were going to pile up. So they launched Operation Ezra. This wasn't a couple of detectives with notebooks. Major crime and counter-terrorism units were pulled in. Intelligence analysts, surveillance teams, firearms officers, the kind of resources normally reserved for terror threats, were now pointed at Glasgow's underworld. The brief was simple. Identify the network behind the trackers, the stolen cars, the encrypted phones, the machetes, and shut it down before someone finally ended up in a coffin instead of a hospital bed. Raids began sweeping across Glasgow, Lanarkshire and Renfrewshire. Doors were smashed in at dawn. Properties linked to suspected Lions operatives were stormed. Officers tore through wardrobes, floorboards and false walls. They seized dozens of encrypted mobile phones, high-end designer clothing, gold jewelry and cash hidden in ingenious compartments inside vehicles and homes. Weapons turned up in surprising places under floorboards, inside false panels, tucked behind insulation. Alongside the raids came something even more chilling: Osman warnings. These are formal legal notices served by police to tell someone there's credible intelligence that their life is in danger. Over 60 of them were issued to individuals connected to both the Daniels and the Lions. It was the largest number ever handed out in a single Scottish operation. The message was blunt. We know who you are, we know what's happening, and we know you might be next. Meanwhile, in the hospital, detectives waited for their key witness to speak. Stephen's injuries were catastrophic, his tongue shredded, jaw disfigured, face ruined. At first, he physically couldn't talk. But even when he could scrawl words, his answer to investigators was short and crystal clear. F off. No cooperation. No names. No revenge through the courts. The code of the street still ruled. If someone tried to butcher you, you didn't turn informant. You hardened. For a while, it looked like that silence might hold. Then came the twist that changed everything. Alistair Macmillan, a former footballer and long-time associate of the Daniels, broke ranks. He turned supergrass. Under heavy protection, he sat down with detectives and started to talk. And what he told them blew the case wide open. Macmillan said he'd been offered £50,000 by the Lions crew to help track Stephen Daniel. He described meeting three key figures, Brian Ferguson, Andrew Gallagher and Robert Pickett, at a remote spot in Renfrewshire. There, they laid out the plan. They wanted movements, routines, habits, where Stephen liked to go, what he drove, who he met. They wanted his life reduced to a pattern they could exploit. Macmillan claimed he tried to feed them misinformation, giving them false details to throw them off. But even with bad intel, the Lions' planning, tech, and determination were enough to put together the ambush that nearly killed Bonzo. Armed with his testimony, detectives began stitching together surveillance footage, phone data, tracker purchase records, and vehicle histories. Piece by piece, they built a map of the conspiracy. Stolen high-powered cars, encrypted burner phones, tracking devices sourced through a Manchester shell company, and a core group of men coordinating it all. It became one of the most complex and high-tech organised crime investigations in modern Scottish history. 2 years after the attack, the case reached its climax. In January 2019, Glasgow High Court was transformed into a fortress. Armed officers guarded the perimeter. Prison vans rolled in under escort. Inside, behind layers of security, 6 men stood accused not just of a single ambush, but of a coordinated 15-month campaign of violence rooted in the Daniel Lyons feud. The accused were Brian Ferguson, 37, Andrew Gallagher, 40, Robert Pickett, 54, John Hardy, 35, Andrew Sinclair, 32, and Peter Bain, 45. They faced charges of conspiracy to murder, linked to 5 separate attempted hits, and 1 near-fatal ambush designed to erase Stephen Bonzo Daniel from existence. The jury were shown chilling CCTV of Stephen's Skoda being rammed, the ambush unfolding with terrifying efficiency, all enabled by the trackers humming away beneath the metal. Macmillan's testimony painted a picture of cold calculation, a Lions crew using encrypted phones and stolen vehicles like tools in a job, not weapons in a blood feud. When Stephen himself took the stand, he denied everything, denied any feud, denied having enemies, denied knowing why anyone would want him dead. Judge Lord Mulholland was openly unimpressed. "I didn't believe a word," he later said, and neither did the jury. After 4 days of deliberation, the verdicts came back guilty. All 6 were convicted of conspiracy to murder. The sentences were brutal, a legal mirror of the violence they'd unleashed. Ferguson, Gallagher, and Hardy received 20 years each. Pickett got 16 years. Bain was sentenced to 15, and Sinclair to 13 years and 3 months. A combined total of 104 years behind bars. Lord Mulholland didn't hold back. He condemned their gangsterist conduct, declaring, "You sought to turn Glasgow into a war zone. This is a civilized city based on the rule of law. There is no place for this retribution or law of the jungle." It was a devastating blow to the Lions clan. But as everyone in Glasgow's underworld knew, a courtroom can lock people up. It can't lock up grudges. Outside the prison walls, the feud was far from finished. When the cell doors slammed shut on the 6 Lions associates, many people in Glasgow hoped the streets might finally quieten down. Stephen Bonzo Daniel was still alive. The conspirators were behind bars, and Operation Ezra had landed its blows. But gangland feuds don't end with a judge's speech. They mutate. They go underground. And for Stephen, survival inside a hospital didn't mean safety outside it. After weeks in a medically induced coma, he stunned doctors by signing himself out of hospital earlier than expected. His face was a patchwork of scars, reconstructed bone, and nerve damage. The man who had once blended into the background was now impossible to miss. The attack had permanently changed him physically, mentally, and strategically. Police kept issuing Osman warnings to gang members across both clans, a constant reminder that the danger hadn't passed, only shifted. In Bishop Briggs, a quiet, respectable suburb, Stephen tried to build some semblance of security. His home, valued at around £340,000, was no ordinary villa anymore. Steel bollards appeared at the front, a physical barrier against any future ram raids. Inside, he had a panic room installed, a fortress within a fortress. In 2019, the house was almost sold, a possible attempt to break away or at least move out of the crosshairs. But the sale fell through, and Stephen stayed put. The war, it seemed, wasn't done with him. In November 2022, it roared back to life. Under the cover of darkness, a Mitsubishi was driven straight at his Bishop Briggs villa, rammed into the property, and then set on fire. Inside, A female relative was watching TV when the vehicle went up in flames. She escaped, but the message was unmistakable. Even in the suburbs, you're not safe. The Daniel clan, furious, reportedly put a 4-figure bounty on the heads of the culprits believed to be 2 brothers who promptly vanished into the underworld. No arrests followed. No closure. Just another scar on an already battered story. By April 2025, things escalated again. 2 properties in Bishopbriggs were firebombed with petrol, one linked to Bonzo, the other connected to Norman Daniel, Jamie's brother. This time, the attack came with its own soundtrack. A chilling video circulated set to Keep On Running by the Spencer Davis Group. Hooded figures were seen torching the homes, and it ended with a simple, venomous message. Exterminate the Daniel virus. 2/7. These attacks weren't random. They were believed to be tied to a £500,000 cocaine theft in Edinburgh. In the background, a Dubai-based gangster allegedly aligned with the Lions was said to have put a £100,000 bounty on Stephen's head. His name also came up in connection with Mark Richardson, an Edinburgh crime boss whose crew was accused of pulling off that cocaine theft. In an underworld built on reputation, this wasn't just business. It was humiliation, betrayal, and payback rolled into one. For a time, Stephen did what many hunted men do. He left. He fled to Dubai, hoping distance and desert heat might offer some protection. But by May 2025, he was back in Glasgow, drawn home by family, loyalty, and business interests that couldn't be managed from afar. He was seen again at Ibrox, again in Postle Park, old haunts, new threats. Only now, he wasn't just a Daniel. He was the top target for enforcers allegedly working for the Dubai Gangster. The violence spread. His cousin, Kelly, Beau, Green Jamie, Daniel's daughter and widow of Kevin Gerbil, Carroll, was attacked in Drumchapel in May 2025. Her home targeted in the ongoing war. The Daniels tried to hit back in a different arena. They launched an Instagram page aimed at exposing the Dubai Gangster, posting alleged details, taunts, and stories designed to drag him into the spotlight and undermine his fear factor. It was gangland gone digital feud by firebomb and feed. Police Scotland, already stretched and hampered by a wall of silence, made arrests where they could. But without witnesses willing to talk, most of the story stayed in the shadows. The Daniel clan, once dominant, now faced a united front, the Lions and their Dubai ally pushing in the same direction. As one source put it bluntly, grudges in the underworld last forever. This won't stop until one side is wiped out. In the dollars. Stephen Daniel's story is a chilling chapter in Glasgow's gangland saga. A family man, a businessman, a crime clan heir turned permanent target. He survived an attack that should have killed him. But survival came at a price, scars, fear, and a perpetual countdown ticking in the background. The 2017 attempted murder exposed just how deep the Daniel Lions feud runs. From Postle Park streets to Glasgow's High Court, from trackers and machetes to Dubai bounties and Instagram warfare, it's a stark reminder of the true cost of crime. 6 Lions associates sit behind bars, serving a combined 104 years, a testament to what justice can do. But with Bonzo back in Glasgow, a £100,000 price reportedly on his head, and a Dubai gangster still pulling strings, the war is far from over. Will the Daniel clan survive this onslaught? Or will the Lions and their allies finally make good on their promise to exterminate the Daniel virus? Only time and the streets of Glasgow will answer that. Who do you think is the most notorious figure in this feud? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more real stories from the dark side of the underworld, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This is Crime Pulse, and we'll be back with another dive into the shadows. Until next time, stay safe.